So before you click that dislike button, just hear me out, because I think I have a good case against the annual pass. One so good that I think you might actually change your mind if you disagree with me right now. At the very least, I think you'll understand where I'm coming from, because you gotta admit, the annual pass was largely a sad, pitiful excuse for content. And no, it wasn't all bad. The Nicki Menagerie is quality stuff. But as a whole, the annual pass was most certainly not worth the $35 that we were charged for it. Now, you may have enjoyed your time with the annual pass, and if you did, honestly, that's great. This video isn't meant to try and take that joy away from you. This video is meant to call out the blatant scam that was the annual pass. I feel that all of us, as paying customers and fans of this franchise, deserved far better, because the annual pass was in fact a ripoff. So, just to be clear, I will not be going over events or activities that were free to all players, like the Dawning, the Revelry brought to you by NBC, or the excellent Outbreak Perfected mission. Yeah, I know, at first I didn't think this mission was free either, but after a little bit of digging, I discovered that the 0 Hour mission was in fact free. So long as you own Forsaken, of course. So for this video, I will solely be focusing exclusively on all of the paid content of each individual season that the annual pass provided, and afterwards, when we're all more or less on the same page, I'm gonna break everything down in a very simple manner to show you conclusively why the annual pass was not worth the amount of money we were forced to pay for it. And who am I? Well, I'm Ren with 2 N's, your favorite little boy in the whole wide world. Let's get started. The annual pass came out swinging with the Season of the Forge. It was a home run, a slam dunk, and a three-pointer all at once. It came with a horde mode game type that had you killing enemies. Blue guys would drop a ball, pick that bad boy up and toss it at the forge. Keep doing that till a boss spawns, then kill the boss, and that's it. If it sounds simplistic, it's because it is. And they stretched this mode out over 4 different areas, and nothing about this is interesting or new from a gameplay standpoint. None of the 4 areas here offer anything different mechanically from one another either. Unless you count tossing the ball up to a higher platform so that another player can toss that ball at the forge, a significant gameplay changer, which you shouldn't, because at the end of the day, you're still just throwing a ball. None of the 4 bosses at the end of these rooms have their own unique mechanics either, just these little robot things that you need to shoot off of them before you can start dealing damage. In this guy, you shoot the side of his shield, but that's it. This is lazy content that, honestly, I think should have been free. Because hear me out. In October of last year, a free event called Festival of the Lost was available to all players. And while it didn't have much to offer in terms of rewards, it did have the Haunted Forest, which was a game type that had so much more to offer in terms of depth than these 4 forges did. So in the Haunted Forest, you had 15 minutes to go through as many waves as possible. And after you completed each wave, the game would add modifiers to enhance the difficulty. Modifiers that make it so that enemies do more melee damage to you while also removing your radar. So as a result, the further you got, the harder it got. But the further in you got, the more rewards you would get at the end of it. You could then use those rewards to buy new masks from the Bimbo, and these masks came with perks that would either allow you to do more damage to adds, more damage to majors, or more damage to bosses. These perks made it so that you could create very basic builds that, when used correctly, would allow you to progress even further into the Infinite Forest to obtain more rewards. And I think that's a pretty great loop, but to be clear, the Haunted Forest was really not all that great. The rewards you got at the end of it weren't really that good, and I don't really think that very many people enjoyed playing the Haunted Forest. I'm only trying to demonstrate that this very simplistic, free activity offered far more in terms of gameplay, depth, and replayability than anything in the Forges did. The Forge is in dire need of some additional mechanics. Like, hey, maybe after you pick up the ball, if you kill enemies by hitting them with it, you can charge it up, turn it into a Nova Ball. that would do massive damage when you throw it at the boss. But the catch is you need to get a kill with that ball once every 7 seconds, or else it'll blow up and kill you. That sounds like it'd be kind of fun. It would force you to strategize a little bit with your teammates. There'd be times where they would have to protect you while also tossing balls themselves to progress to the boss. And if there's no enemies near you, you can toss it over to them. At the very least, this mechanic would differentiate itself from the other stuff you do in this game. But to make matters even worse, you couldn't even properly play any of these forges until you reached a high enough light level, meaning that in order to play the content you paid for, you had to complete bounties, run through strikes, run through old story missions, suffer through Gambit, and do public events. Basically, play through older content that wasn't all that great the first time you played it in order to unlock higher level gear, all so that you can play this incredibly generic, depthless, lazy game type. But wait, it gets even worse. In order to unlock some of these forges, you had to complete quests that had you doing nothing but pathetic busy work, some of which would take several hours to complete. I don't know who could possibly enjoy doing any of these tasks. Look at all of these bullet points, there's so damn many of them. It's like looking at the credits for an indie game. None of this filth is fun, and this is what you need to complete before you toss a ball at a hunk of metal. This is what we paid for. They charged money for this, and it's sickening. Now, admittedly, unlocking the fourth forge had some creativity involved with it. There was this little event, I guess you could call it, that most people have probably forgotten by now, called the Niobe Labs, and what it was essentially, I guess, a mini raid that had 7 puzzles attached to it. After you completed one puzzle, you'd move on to the next round to tackle the next puzzle. The first fire team in the world to complete the Niobe Labs would unlock the fourth forge for the rest of the world. But the thing is, there was no checkpoint system. And for over 36 hours, hundreds of streamers banged their head against this puzzle, and no one could find out how to solve it. So just to reiterate, we couldn't play the content we paid for until some streamer completed the damn thing. But since nobody could figure it out quickly enough, Bungie just went ahead and released the forge anyway. Fine with me, but all those streamers' hard work just went straight out the window. But I can't really blame these guys for not being able to solve the puzzle, because this stuff was pretty nutty.
Wait, does Spartan have something? Because he says credit. Stand on the corresponding house symbols with their weapon. Shoot the special box on Void Pillar with bow 5 times. And then machine gun shoot the fire pillar 3 times. And then sniper shoot the arc pillar 2 times. How are you determining which is what pillar?
And for the final nail in the coffin, as if unlocking these forges wasn't tedious enough. If you wanted to play a forge, you couldn't just load into it through the directory like you would with a strike. No, you had to load into Nessus, which on console is about 1.5 minutes of load time. Once you're there, then you gotta travel over to the forge, which in this instance took another 1:30 minutes. Once you get to the forge, you gotta activate it, which triggers yet another loading screen that you then have to sit in for another 1 to 2 minutes before you can play this riveting content. So you spend 5 minutes waiting around to play a 5-minute game type. Time well spent, right? Hey Bungie, whatever happened to this mentality, huh?
You can just open the director, pick your new destination, and go straight there.
It's about getting you into the action faster, and we want to remove as many barriers as we can between your gun and the enemy's face.
Thank God for cross saves, right? Because I cannot wait to transfer over to PC and kiss these load times goodbye. Because seriously, I did a test, and from the second you press A to launch Destiny, when you include going to the tower to grab bounties, which is essential, if you ain't grabbing them, you're missing out on a lot of loot. It can take you anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes before you actually start playing the game. The load times have been plaguing this game for as long as I can remember. They need to be addressed on console, because this cannot continue. But Season of the Forge wasn't all bad. The new exotics that came with it were really cool, and some of them took me yo ton of tries to unlock. The new guns all feel appropriately powerful, and they fit very well into the game. I like all of these a lot. And of course there is the raid, and I think that Scourge of the Past is quite possibly one of my favorite raids in the franchise. The environment of an old abandoned city is very unique to Destiny, but it also provides a massive playable space, meaning you gotta use your Sparrow in order to get to certain locations in time during the first encounter. And then once you get underground, you get treated to a full-on Sparrow section, which has you boosting away from a giant servitor that kills you if it gets too close. This is pretty intense, and it's honestly a blast to do. For years now, I've wanted a Sparrow section in a raid, and I'm glad we got it. Then after that, to fight the boss, you gotta summon these tanks, hop into them, and lay into whatever this thing is with all your firepower. This raid is so creative and memorable. It had a great sense of scale, it brought new mechanics to the table by allowing the use of vehicles. It's definitely a very unique raid, and I really appreciate that. But Scourge of the Past is the only piece of substantial content from this entire season. And if you want to tell me that the Last Word exotic quest was substantive, bitch, you're dead wrong. That Last Word quest was a grindy, lazily designed, miserable pain in the ass. You had to do so much garbage. Take a look at this.
The first step of the quest requires you to kill Hive with solar weapons, kill 3 Hive bosses, and get 75 Hive tablets. The next step requires you to play PvP. You need 100% completion for this quest. A kill will get you 2 points, and a death will subtract 1. The next step will take you to Titan, where you need to do a mission which is essentially just doing a lost sector that is a little bit harder. Step 4 is a much longer process requiring the completion of 4 different objectives. The first part is to collect etched crystals from Lost Sector Wanted Escapee bosses. But you need to do this 15 times for 15 crystals, nothing else to it. The second part requires more Crucible. You need to get 25 best served cold and or blood for blood medals. The third part requires 50 Hive larvae to be collected. The final part is something you should be doing while doing all of the other parts at the same time, and that is 3 heroic Witch Ritual public event completion. After you've completed this part, you will go back to the Drifter, and he will give you the final part of the quest. When you beat that enemy, you will be rewarded with the Last Word.
This garbage took me 5 hours to complete. This is not okay. We all paid money to replay through nothing but tons of old, recycled content to unlock a gun that I already had 4 years ago in Destiny 1.
Last word! Oh my gosh!
I got
last word. Last word!
Now, if this quest were free, I wouldn't be upset about it. But I will say this. The ending to this quest was really cool, since it was essentially a brand new story mission, which also kind of fit with the theme of the Last Word. It felt very Wild West, and was different from anything else the game had done up to this point. I have to admit that this mission was kind of neat, but honestly, overall, playing the Black Armory genuinely felt like having a job. I paid $35 to go to work. Seriously, there's almost no difference. Sitting in a spaceship while you fly to an activity is like sitting on the bus while it drives you to work. Going to the tower to pick up bounties is the equivalent of clocking into a shift at McDonald's. Doing 15 lost sectors is the equivalent of doing 15 checks on lost inventory. The point is, all of this content is just busy work, and it feels like a job, which isn't how a video game should feel.
Ding!
Ding! Ding! Ding! Ding! Trash on the field, bring a shovel. Season of the Drifter came with even less content than Black Armory. But to its credit, at least you didn't have to jump through hours of mundanity in order to access the initial content. Well, I guess you kinda did now that I think about it, since if you want to access Tier 3 of the Reckoning, you'll have to spend hours upon hours leveling up your character to be the appropriate light level again, since they upped the max light by 50 again. Season of the Drifter boils down to 2 things, with the first being the Reckoning, and I reckon that this may very well be one of the worst activities in the game. The Reckoning is a game type that has you go to an area, okay, get this, where you kill a bunch of enemies there to, you guessed it, spawn a boss. Then, hang on, you kill the boss. Well, that's just tier 1, okay? In tier 2 and 3 of the Reckoning, after you kill all of the enemies, you have to go to a bridge and capture 6 control points while a never-ending onslaught of Shadow Thrall attack you. After you capture all those zones, you go to another area and kill the boss there. And you know, credit where credit's due. The first time I did the bridge portion here, I thought it was kinda neat. But in all reality, all it really is just an incredibly watered down version of the first encounter from the Dark Below. Now, while the Reckoning offers more than the Black Armory in terms of depth and variety, somehow it's much worse. Which honestly is surprising to me, because on paper, this should be way more fun, right? Where the forges are repetitive and bland, the Reckoning is also those things, but it does suffer from some very different issues. First off, it's cheap. Bungie's idea of difficulty here was to put you on a small bridge while spawning giant bosses both in front of and behind you, who, if they get close enough to you, they just boop you off of the bridge. Now, if you have a decent fire team, this won't be an issue. However, when you're a loner like myself, you get paired up with nuggets who don't seem to know what to do. So you'll all get knocked off the bridge, fail the encounter, and restart from the very beginning. That's 4 minutes wasted. You can wind up losing a lot of time to this. It's just such a lazy way of inflating the difficulty. Secondly, the environment here is a little bit too one note. While it looks neat the first time you look at it, it really doesn't offer much visually on repeat visits. It's just that, I mean, you're looking at it. There's way too much white. I know I sound like a Kotaku article when I say that, but you get the point. This is very visually bland. At the very least, the forges were a bit more visually pleasing. And thirdly, the reward you get from doing the Reckoning is not worth the effort you need to put into completing this filth. After 7 minutes of tedium, you're rewarded with a piece of armor that you can then use in Gambit Prime. But that's only if you actually completed this event, which is a miracle with randoms, and you gotta pray to God that once you actually do complete this event, that the game doesn't bug out and refuse to give you your reward. Something that has happened to me on multiple occasions. That powerful moat you see me getting up there, that's the item I put into this thing to start the event. But if you want a full set of Gambit Prime armor, you've got to complete this same exact marathon over and over again. It's so much effort for such a measly reward. But to be honest with you, Gambit Prime isn't too bad. The huge drawback here is, if you're somebody who loves Gambit Prime, you'll be forced to play through the Reckoning dozens of times in order to enjoy Prime to its fullest potential. Because trust me, you're going to want some of these armor sets. They add a lot of depth to the game type. So once you get a full set, you can create builds that do things like, instead of only being able to bank 15 motes, you can now bank a maximum of 20, which will send a giant blocker over to the other team. You can get an armor set so that when you invade, the other team can't bank motes while you're invading them. You can even drain motes from their bank just by being there. It's honestly pretty neat stuff. And Gambit Prime added a new little mechanic, so now if you want to damage the boss, you gotta kill all the envoys, which will spawn a pool of light that you can stand in to do extra damage to the boss. And this feels like a great natural evolution of Gambit. I went from hating Gambit to thinking that it's just okay. I kind of enjoy it from time to time, and that's a good step. And to cap things off, Season of the Drifter also came with its own grindy quest that you had to complete in order to unlock the Thorn, yet another weapon that we already had in Destiny 1. But this time, the quest was somehow even more uninspired and lazy than the Last Word quest. This one didn't come with its own unique story mission. It just had you replaying more old content and completing more busy work. I cannot stress enough how lazy this type of quest design is. I know I sound like a broken record, but this is nothing more than a sad excuse to replay old content. Nothing about this is fun or interesting. And these quests are just far too easy. Anybody could do this. So instead of a tedious grind, how about you give us a brutal solo challenge? Something that not everybody is gonna be able to complete. So that way, when I earn that reward, I'm proud of it. And that when other people see that I've completed this solo event, they fear me. They know what I've gone through, and they aspire to earn that gear for themselves, because these quests are just so insignificant. But that's pretty much all Season of the Drifter had to offer. Yes, there were some Xur bounties, which when you completed them, they showed you a couple of cutscenes that were admittedly pretty interesting, but the bounties themselves were just more busy work, you know, the standard tedium, complete some strikes. Season of the Fister was positively dreadful. So, Season of Opulence dropped with yet another Horde mode game type. This time it's called the Menagerie. The pattern continues to repeat itself. Except, the Menagerie is actually good. It's filled with variety. Each room has its own set of mechanics, like this one right here, where you gotta kill harpies that drop a weapon that allow you to destroy these crystals that spawn on the wall. Destroy enough crystals, and you spawn a boss. You kill the boss, everything in the room gets harder, and you repeat the process until you earn enough points. Then you move on to the next room, which could lead to anything, like an area where you have to collect some souls and dunk them, or an area that has you running through an even more difficult version of the Gauntlet from the Leviathan raid. Each room in the Menagerie has its own set of mechanics and gets gradually more difficult as you progress. And there is a rotation of 3 different bosses, which all have their own unique mechanics. My favorite one is this guy right here, where during his damage phase, he'll summon these gigantic walls of death that just truck through the room. So you can't just sit still in a well of radiance to properly damage him. You gotta move out of the way of these walls, and it's a fun little boss. The rewards you get for doing this are worthwhile too. You get this chalice, which you can upgrade with Imperials, a new form of currency. To get Imperials, you can complete triumphs, do the new bounties, or just buy Imperials with Glimmer. And this form of progression was honestly kind of addicting. I wanted to unlock all of the chalice perks because they're all very helpful. It felt good to have something meaningful to grind for. And I haven't even mentioned the best part yet. For the first time ever in Destiny's history, you can choose what type of gun or piece of armor drops from the end of the Menagerie as your reward. So if you want a hand cannon, just open up your chalice, place the correct runes appropriately, and if you're like me, you'll get the god roll of the Austringer on your very first try. Beautiful. If every season had brought with it something as substantial as the Menagerie, I wouldn't be making this video. The Menagerie is miles above the Forges and the Reckoning. It's not even close. And I can see them iterating on this in the future, creating new rooms, creating new bosses, things like that. Whereas I don't really see where they're going to take the Forges or the Reckoning as Destiny 2 moves forward. I feel like those activities are just going to die out. I don't know what they can do with them. But I'm getting off track. I gotta talk about the new raid, which is, you know, it's pretty okay. Crown of Sorrows is honestly probably one of my least favorite raids in the series. I mean, it's better than the Dark Below, and I like it a hell of a lot more than I like the vanilla Leviathan raid. Crown of Sorrows isn't bad by any means. It's just really overshadowed by all the greatness that the other raids have left us with. There's not really any memorable encounters. The entire raid pretty much just repeats the same mechanic over and over again for 4 straight encounters, and by the end of it, it winds up feeling kinda samey. You just swap this buff back and forth with a partner about once a minute, and that's kind of it. But with that said, the encounters in this raid are still some of the most fun and challenging things that Destiny 2 can offer. Crown of Sorrows doesn't have that grand sense of scale that I'm used to. It definitely felt more along the lines of a raid layer, more so than it did a full-on raid, especially since it does take place inside the Leviathan. This is the 4th raid that's in there now. But overall, I'd say this raid is a good time, no alcohol required. But of course, a season of the annual pass wouldn't be complete without another grindy, exotic quest. But this time, instead of 1, we get 2 quests. One for the Truth, and one for the Lumina. Both of them were tedious, 3 to 5 hour grinds that brought with them no new content and forced you to play nothing but old content. You all already know how I feel about this. However, I will cut the Lumina some slack because this is a brand new gun. It wasn't in the first game. And it's actually pretty neat. Once you kill an enemy with it, that enemy drops an orb. After you pick that orb up, you can shoot it at your teammates to heal them. Doing that will buff both your weapon damage as well as your teammates' weapon damage. Now this is really neat since it allows you to experiment with a whole new playstyle for the Crucible. It opens up a wealth of gameplay options. It's everything an exotic should be. So yes, Season of Opulence did offer some substantial content. However, overall, the annual pass was just not worth the money. So at full price, this, I don't know what you'd call it, DLC costs $35, which to put that in perspective is $5 less than what they charged for Forsaken, which means that the amount of content provided by the annual pass should be close to the amount of content we got from Forsaken, right? So let's break it down here. Forsaken came with 2 brand new locations, both of which came complete with their own lost sectors, patrols, and public events. There was also 6 story missions, 6 adventures, a new enemy type, 4 new strikes, 3 new Crucible maps, Gambit, 4 Gambit maps, a new weapon type, 9 new subclass nodes, the Last Wish raid, and the Shattered Throne dungeon. And there could be more that I'm forgetting. Now for just $5 less, the annual pass came with 4 identical forges, Niobe Labs, which not very many people have even played, Scourge of the Past raid, the Crown of Sorrows raid, the Reckoning, the Menagerie, 2 new Gambit maps, and of course there was Gambit Prime, which according to a Polygon article will become free to all players in September when Shadowkeep launches. And that's it. That's all we got. Any way you slice it, the annual pass was not worth the $35 they charged us for it. Like I said before, free events like Festival of the Lost and even the Revelry came with activities that were free and provided as much or more depth than the Forges and the Reckoning. Most of the content in the annual pass was nothing more than fluff. And while it may have forced you to put more time into the game, time spent in a game does not justify the amount of money you've spent on the product. Having to replay tons of old content that wasn't even fun the first time around, let alone the 100th time, just so that I could become a high enough light level to properly play some new type of horde mode does not justify the purchase. And even worse, this was just a huge waste of time. And time is so much more valuable than money, because you can make your money back, but you can never get your time back. And if you enjoyed yourself while replaying all this old content, you know, that's great. I'm glad you had fun. But it doesn't change the fact that you were still replaying old content. Content that you could have replayed without purchasing the annual pass. And for the final cherry on top, the main reason I play this game has always been for the Crucible, which got absolutely no new content. Nothing apart from a couple of nerfs and a couple of buffs, which is such a massive missed opportunity because the Crucible is far and away the most replayable part of this game. Yet it was left untouched. It's still in shambles. And what the hell is this? I've played 3 matches in the past 24 hours where all the players on the enemy team were just permanently invisible. What the hell's that? But I'm getting off track. I honestly think that this game would have been better off if they had decided not to make the Forges or the Reckoning and instead focus that manpower and dev time on creating new strikes, or maybe just adding things to existing strikes to make them more fun and replayable. Or if they spent their time on creating a new Crucible game type, or just even on creating new missions like the 0 Hour. They wasted so much of their time and our time on creating worthless content, some of which a majority of the player base doesn't even want to touch. Destiny was a franchise that I once truly loved, a franchise that I was passionate about since the day it launched. And Destiny 1 went through massive content droughts, but I still played it at least 3 times a week despite the lack of content because I genuinely loved playing it. And while Forsaken was a fantastic expansion, every other piece of DLC has been utterly terrible. And during Season of the Drifter, things were starting to feel really hopeless. I just felt so tapped out. And at that time, I had planned on making this video my final video about Destiny 2. But Bungie looks like they're really trying to turn things around, so I'm willing to stick with them for a little while longer. But I don't know how many more chances I can give them. I think this is it, because I can only handle so much. and the annual pass was so damn scummy that I'm pretty much convinced that it was mostly Activision's idea to do this. Because ever since Bungie split away from them, Bungie has been coming out with some pretty great announcements. So hopefully the next DLC will make me want to shadow keep playing this game. In all honesty, I have high hopes for it. So you can best believe that I will be doing a review of Shadowkeep this September. And lastly, back in December, some of you guys might remember that when the annual pass launched, I made a video called Why You Should Pass on the Annual Pass. And that video was met with a pretty good amount of outrage, dislikes, and comments claiming that I was wrong, or that I put the video out too soon. But the reason I made that video so soon was in the hopes that people wouldn't purchase the annual pass, at least not at full price, because I believed then, as I always will, that the annual pass was a ripoff. And you know what? That video worked. People didn't buy this, which is good, because there have been so many quality games this year that they could have spent that money on and spent their time on. What upsets me personally is that I got a couple of things wrong in that video, like how to unlock the Black Armory exotics and the length of the Scourge of the Past raid. Nothing too huge, but you know, I still should have done better. But that's about it. That's my piece on the annual pass. So if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to click like. I hate having to ask for that, but likes genuinely do help the video out. Seriously. And your like will compensate for the dislikes that I'm sure a ton of people left before even watching 10 seconds of the video. And if you want to share this video to a friend, go for it. Please do. And consider becoming a Patreon. We're getting closer and closer to the first goal, which I'm very excited about doing. I would post a monthly drunk video of me reacting to my old content or content that my Patreons recommend for me. And people love it when I get drunk. Plus, when you got a channel as small as mine, everything helps. And you know the drill. I got a Twitter, I got a Twitch. Come follow me on both of them. I'll be streaming Shadowkeep when it comes out. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.